Hello and welcome to Sherlock Mondays, everyone. I'm Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and we're going on a biblioventure through the stories of Sherlock Holmes. This is episode 3, The Sign of Four, or The Sign of the Four. We could talk about that later. Part 1, and joining me as co-host is Monica Schmidt. Hi, Monica.
Hey, Ed. How you doing tonight?
I am great. Welcome to this biblioventure madness. I'm happy to have you as one of the co-hosts now. And also joining us today is a special guest to talk about annotated editions of Sherlock Holmes stories, and that's Leslie Klinger. Hi, Les.
Hey there. On a Sherlock Monday, although every day is Sherlock.
Every day's a Sherlock for you, I'm sure. And Les, you're going to stay around. You're going to stay around to talk about the story too, right? So we'll have you for the whole time. I mean, I can't think of a better guest to talk about what may be my favorite Sherlock story. I'm always up in it's always hard to pick a favorite child, right? But Sign of Four might be. All right, everyone, for 30 weeks, we will deduce, decipher, dissect Arthur Conan Doyle's stories about the world's first consulting detective, Sherlock Holmes, and his able assistant, Dr. John Watson. It will be a kind of conversational annotation. If you are watching live right now, please like and subscribe and have fun in the live chat. And if you are watching the recording, also please like and subscribe to the Rosenbach's channel. If you are and also to let you know that Sherlock Mondays is also available as an audio podcast. So thank you to all of our podcast listeners. I'd also like to ask everyone to please consider making a donation to the Rosenbach. I want to thank those of you who have donated or joined as members in the last few weeks. That's really how I get to do this show for free because of your support for the Rosenbach. So if you have not already donated or become a member, I invite you to do so, and I thank you. Les, you don't know this, I'm going to give away a copy of one of Les's books. Alas, not the Sherlock annotateds. The only ones I have are my own. But we have a bunch of these annotated Frankensteins still at the Rosenbach from when you were there, Les, when you as a book tour, and it's signed. So wow. We're going to have a trivia question, and it'll be a Rosenbach trivia question at the mid-break today. And then the first person who gives the answer in the live chat will win this annotated Frankenstein by Les Klinger. Let me introduce my co-host and special guest. First, Monica Schmidt is the president of the Younger Stamfords of Iowa City, a BSI Scion Society. She is a member of multiple Sherlockian societies, including the Norwegian Explorers of Minnesota, the Sons of Copper Beaches, of the Copper Beaches of Philadelphia, and the Speckled Band of Boston, and the Hounds of the Baskerville Sick of Chicago. Since 2013, Monica has been a staple in the Sherlockian conference lecture circuit, typically speaking on the subject of Sherlock Holmes and mental health, having written the definitive essay on Holmes's cocaine use in the canon. She received the investiture of Julia Stoner from the Baker Street Irregulars in 2019 and the Church of St. Monica from the Adventuresses of Sherlock Holmes in 2015. When not engaging in Sherlockian events or playing cricket, Monica is a licensed mental health counselor in private practice.
Yeah, I need to pare that back a little bit.
Well, I even pared it back, but I like to give your Sherlockian credentials, so I'm happy.
Oh yeah, I'm a member of probably 33, 34 different Sherlockian societies or scions. It's like Pokemon, you got to collect them all.
Well, Leslie S. Klinger is considered to be one of the world's foremost authorities on Sherlock Holmes, Dracula, H.P. Lovecraft, Frankenstein, Jekyll and Hyde, the history of crime and horror fiction. I could go on. Les is a longtime member of the Baker Street Irregulars and served as the series editor for their manuscript series. He is currently the series editor for the BSI's biography series. To date, he has edited more than 75 books. His new annotated Sherlock Holmes books were the most important new contribution to Sherlock Holmes literature since William Baring-Gould's 1967 classic work, which I'm sure we'll wind up talking about tonight as well. Les was the technical advisor for both of the Warner Brothers Sherlock Holmes films with Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law, as well as he was a technical advisor for the Enola Holmes films with Millie Bobby Brown. Les, you've got quite the resume as well. Thanks for
you didn't use the phrase that our friend Lindsay Fay coined. She called me the world's first consulting Sherlockian.
Yes.
Which I thought was a lovely title.
That is the world's first consulting Sherlockian. That's what we have today. And Les, you've been on other shows too. You've been on our Sundays with Frankenstein. You've been on our Sundays with Dracula. So I'm so happy to have you back
always a pleasure, Ed.
for this. First, let me hear a little bit from Monica, as I want to do for all the new co-hosts coming on the show for the first time, about your Sherlockian story. How did you first get involved in this world?
Oh man, that's a long story, but the shortest version I can give you is when I was a little kid. I watched a lot of TV. I probably watched stuff that I shouldn't have been watching at that age. But my first recollection of Sherlock Holmes was this made-for-TV movie. I remember it airing. I was a little kid. I had to have been about five and a half-ish. And I remember this guy wearing this funny hat, having a really weird accent, smoking a pipe. And then something about cryogenically frozen, which my little brain didn't comprehend. And then my mother made me go to bed. And that image and that idea stuck with me for years. And I spent, in all honesty, the next 20 years looking for that bloody made-for-TV movie, only to discover it was the Return of Sherlock Holmes with Michael Pennington and Margaret Collin, remade later in the 90s. And I saw the remake as it aired, which was called 1994 Baker Street. Not as good, but it is what it is. But so that was like my first encounter with Sherlock Holmes. I ended up getting a children's edition of The Mysteries of Sherlock Holmes, which is like this little abridged, accessible version that had the speckled band and the blue carbuncle and the red-headed league. Became obsessed. And then later on, as I was once again flipping through the channels, had to have been about 10, 11 years old. And boom, I flipped to A&E and there is Jeremy Brett. And that performance just absolutely captivated me. I saw the first episode I saw was the Red-Headed League. And in the Granada series, as we call it, the next episode that airs after that is The Final Problem. So here I am, having not read any of the stories. I found this Sherlock Holmes that I really like. I found this character that I find compelling, or this actor that I find compelling. And then the second episode, he dies.
Yeah.
And little inconsolable me, whined to my aunt, who then bought me a copy of the Doubleday for Christmas that year, which was Christmas of 91. In the Doubleday, there was the preface written by Morley about the Baker Street Irregulars. And, of course, little me swore that someday I would be a member of the Baker Street Irregulars and that I would attend their annual dinner. What I didn't realize is only earlier that year is when women were allowed. So it was, kind of kismet that brought it in. So that's, we'll just say obsession with the canon, obsession with Jeremy Brett, and then it has just kind of never let go since then.
Obsession, that's a theme in your life, I imagine, too. And then you get to deal with people's obsessions for a living. So
exactly. This one is less damaging to my health. Very damaging to my pocketbook, but less damaging to my health.
Well, we will get to know more about your Sherlockian story as you come on for further episodes over the course of this series. And then here's what we're going to do today, everyone. We're going to take about 30 minutes with Les Klinger to talk about the history and method of annotated editions of Sherlock Holmes. And then we'll do our 90 minutes of conversational annotation on Sign of Four, which Les will also stay around for it and talk about that with Monica and I. But also, I should mention, I'm going to give away Did I mention this yet? I can't remember what I mentioned before or during the show. We're going to give away the copy of Frankenstein. I did mention it.
Yes. I thought you were going to give away something else too. Second, turning into a game show.
It's hard for me to keep track of everything I'm saying before and after the show starts. But we'll do that at the mid-break. So, Les, if it could be a brief story, and I don't think it could be, how did you first get involved?
Well, actually, it is a brief story, and mine is much less exciting and theatrical than Monica's. For me, it was the Baring-Gould Annotated Sherlock Holmes. Like most people, I probably read a story or two when I was in high school. I probably saw a Rathbone film or two, but they didn't make any impression. My girlfriend at the time in 1968 saw in a store window a copy of Baring-Gould and said, gee, I'll bet Les would like that. I don't know why she thought that, but she did. And she brought it home, and I got hooked. I was in law school at the time, desperate for some recreational reading. I just dove in headfirst into the footnotes and never came up. I soon thereafter subscribed to the Baker Street Journal. When I came to LA, I joined a local science society, then called the Non-Canonical Calabash. And I, somewhere along the line, decided to start collecting things Sherlockian. In the beginning, it was very desultory, very uneducated. It was sort of like, oh, there's something Sherlock Holmes, I have to have it. And later, I got very lucky. Back in the old days, the very old days, the Baker Street Journal had classified ads. And a Sherlockian from the San Francisco Bay Area was selling his collection, and he wanted the enormous sum of $3,000 for it. This was in 1978, I think. And I talked it over with my wife, and she said, you know, you should be a collector. You're a collector. It was 3,000 books. I'm sorry, it was 300 books, but they were clearly far superior to what I had been collecting before. They were the original Baker Street Irregulars pamphlets. They were all kinds of things that had originally sold for, you know, $1 or $2 a copy, but it was the core of a very fine collection. And so I bought that. Suddenly my collection went from like 100 books to 400 books, and now it's about 5,000. So it was clearly a good self-diagnosis that I was a collector at heart.
I think I have 5,000.
That's how I got started.
Entirely. I think all my books are, I think I have about 5,000. But
well, it started for me as just being just a collector. And then one day, my blessed wife, Sharon, said to me, as I was annoying her with what we were going to do for the weekend, she said, you know, you have all those books upstairs. Why don't you write something? And okay.
Have to prove your worth as a Sherlockian, but you know, you've done so much with it, and with the annotateds. But how did
let's talk about annotating. Yeah.
I mean, the Baring-Goulds is where I started, and where a lot of
it's not the first. The first annotated edition is the Christopher Morley, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson.
The textbook of friendship.
Textbook of friendship, which is only a few stories. It's, I think, 4 or 5 stories with some annotations, and it's charming. It's useful. But Baring-Gould was this incredible piece of work. I mean, I always have to remind myself that Baring-Gould did it pre-internet, pre-computer, for that matter. So, I mean, he was doing this with note cards and, you know, all kinds of resources. But and he did this monumental thing. I mean, the Baring-Gould edition came out. He died before it came out, by the way. It came out in 1968. And it's about 1,500 pages. It has, I don't know, maybe 2,000 footnotes, 1,500, 2,000 footnotes. A lot of the notes are devoted to the subject of chronology, which is a unique topic. and Baring-Gould had his own chronology in mind, but he wrote some long, excellent essays of background material. There were a lot of pictures in the book. It was black and white, and it just was a great launch. It was, for me, it was the discovery of the cult of Sherlock Holmes. It was the menu to all of the scholarship out there, because it opened the doors to the Baker Street Journal, the Sherlock Holmes Journal, all the publications, all the books, and all the people. I mean, lots and lots of names of people that some of them I was glad to actually finally meet, many of whom had passed away long before I came on the scene, passed away, either died or had sort of retired from Sherlockiana. But it was a wonderful introduction to the world, and it made me want to be part of that world.
Yeah. And I mean, Pache, the hardcore Sherlockians, but it plays the game too, and it is designed to, Holmes is real and Watson is real, and let's figure out how all this works, because you have so many, contradictions in text and inconsistencies. Right. And
so the next big annotated edition was the Oxford edition, a 9-volume set. And that was done by real scholars. Owen Dudley Edwards being the senior editor who oversaw the whole project. And this was very much a Doylean annotation. It did not play the game. And many of the footnotes are devoted to literary references, Doyle biographical notes, and source material notes, and so on. Frankly, nothing that interested me, but it was a very substantial piece of work. And there it sat. That came out in the 80s, I think. And so long about the mid 90s, when my wife said, "Why don't you go write something?" I thought to myself, well, maybe the time is now upon me. I had thought this would be a project for my dotage. Maybe it was. Maybe my dotage came early. But I said, gee.
You're having a very long dotage now with all the annotated you're doing as well.
The kids were grown. I had enough time to do it. I started to annotate a few stories. I did 2 or 3 stories, printed them up, shared them with some friends, and got my ears boxed by people reading it, because they pointed out that I'd done things like reprinted the Baring-Gould notes and just added more material to them and all that. And that wasn't, even though we're just friends, that was a copyright violation. So, but they gave me a lot of sound criticism for my efforts. Fortunately for me, one of the sets of friends was Steve Doyle and Mark Gagan, who looked at it and said, this is pretty good. Let's publish this. And it was like, whoa, I can have a book? So eventually this became called the Sherlock Holmes Reference Library. We came to the decision to publish it in originally 9 volumes, because that was the way Conan Doyle published the stories. The 4 novels and the 5 collections of short stories. So the first one was the adventures. The second one came out was the memoirs. I think we did Study in Scarlet next. And someone, I think it was a friend, said, your writing style, Les, it's law review. I'm not sure it was a friend, because I think what they meant was, they were quite right. There were pages that were sort of one line of text and the rest of the page was footnote. Law review style, with extensive quotations from third-party sources. I mean, if somebody had something interesting to say, I'd type out the whole 3 paragraphs, and put it into a footnote. But the books came out. The Adventures was very well received, to my shock, and won an award, and et cetera. So I was moving forward with that, I was up to about 4 or 5 volumes in that series. First one was 98, so we're doing annually 98, 99. I was up to about 5 volumes. And then I got a call out of the blue from Robert Weil, who is the senior editor still at W.W. Norton. And he said, we want to redo the Baring-Gould edition, and we hear that you should be the editor. I was like, me? You know, I'm a lawyer from Los Angeles, and what do I know about this? And I've never been a professor. I mean, I was selling the reference library books, but the Sherlockian market, by the way, those books have been an enormous bestseller. I think they've probably sold 500 copies over 25 years. So that's a big bestseller in the Sherlockian market. It's a very small
the
market.
Apocrypha is still out of print, and I'm still looking for a copy.
It's a small market. So when I picked myself up off the floor and figured out they really did want to do this and they were going to pay me and all that, I had to go get an agent. And I originally thought, oh, this is a piece of cake. I've already done this. I'll just take the reference library books and rearrange them a little bit, and that'll be it. No, Norton wanted every note rewritten. They did not want 3 paragraphs quoted from the original source. They wanted a paraphrase of what it said, and so on. And they wanted pictures, and they wanted more cultural references and social customs and things like that weren't in the reference library. And but 2 years later, the first 2 volumes came out, and to my utter shock, it won the Edgar. And then we did the 3rd volume of the novels and was nominated for the Edgar. And it was at that point that I said to myself, oh, well, I'm obviously God's gift to writers. I should keep doing this. So, but it was an amazing thing to feel like I had lived out my dream of updating the Baring-Gould edition. And I always say, by the way, that I clearly stood on Baring-Gould's shoulders. I mean, I had 3 great advantages that he didn't have in doing this annotated edition. One was the internet. The internet turned out to be an enormously useful resource to find material. One of my favorite stories is looking for something only to find that it was in a book that was sitting on my shelf over there, but that I didn't think to look in that book to find. So that was one big advantage. The second big advantage was the DeWall bibliography. I hope people know about that. It's a 5-volume set, 5 volumes, that indexes 25,000 items of Sherlockiana. And the third big advantage was I got to start with the Baring-Gould.
Yeah. So you had a starter there to kind of model, the way you approached as well.
Yeah. I mean, when I thought to myself, should I do a footnote about X? The first question was, well, did Baring-Gould?
But it was still an enormous amount of, especially all the kind of contextual, information.
Well, I also went back and read everything that Baring-Gould cited. We can talk about methodology in a minute, but one of the things I found, and I still don't know quite what to make of this, because remember, Baring-Gould died before the book came out. When I was checking the sources of a lot of the material that he referenced in footnotes, I found that there were paragraphs, large sections that had been just lifted directly out of the source material without attribution. And I like to think that would have been fixed if he had survived to supervise the publication. But the publishers, Clarkson Potter, didn't check it, I guess. So when I used that material in the reference library, I was very, very lawyer-like about citing the sources and all that. And then, of course, as I said, summarized it for the Norton edition.
Monica, did you start with Baring-Gould as well?
Yeah, I mean, as far as annotated, yeah, I mean, my
Yeah.
first copy of the of the canon, of course, was a Doubleday, but as far as the first annotated copy, is the Baring-Gould, which actually is in the other room on the other side of the wall. So there's always a copy of the Baring-Gould close by. But then, of course, when I was a younger, we'll just say Sherlockian coming onto the scene, one of the first things that I did, and those, your copies of the annotated, Les, are bloody expensive, man, for a young person just getting out into the world. So I had to save up for those, but it was.
You're right. The Baring-Gould was $35 when it first came out. Now that was a lot for a book, but
Yeah.
that was within the realm of reason.
Oh yeah, I mean it's reasonable, but it's also like, when you're in your early 20s and you're broke, it's like, do I eat today or do I buy a $35 book?
Well, we know the answer.
I bought the book.
Yeah.
But it used to be the Baring-Goulds are like, once you finally decided that I'm a Sherlockian, or I'm so interested in this, the Baring-Gould was the first one to get, and now it's yours, Les.
Well, thanks. And by the way, I mean, one of the things I'm very happy about is that Norton published mine as ebooks as well.
Yeah.
I spent tremendous amounts of effort and money, because I'm a collector, on acquiring high quality sources for the illustrations. So some of the illustrations in the annotated book that are, 2 inches square, on the iPad, you can blow them up to a full screen, and they're gorgeous.
Yeah.
Because they're very high resolution scans of whether they're Paget's or some of the other. I mean, I tried to include this. The 3 volumes has 3,000 illustrations. We tried to include. I'm chagrined to say that I missed a Paget. There's one Paget that's not in there, but of course I did have the unpublished Paget portrait of Sherlock Holmes that Costa-Rozakis owns. That's this one that he gave us permission to include. But
yes,
the illustrations were tremendous fun, a lot of work, and I think a very important part of the value of those books. I'm not patting myself on the back. I'm just saying this book was 98% perspiration. There was a certain amount of inspiration, and one of the things, somebody just emailed me the other day, pointing out that they had just read a footnote that I wrote, and it was an original note that I had written. It wasn't something anybody else had written about. And there aren't very many of those, but there are some, and I was so proud of that.
That's nice.
So that's why I say it was 98% perspiration, but the illustrations were tremendous fun. And again, the Sherlockian community was very supportive. Jerry Margolin, Costa-Rozakis, people like that, Glenn Moranker, lent me original stuff to scan and put into the book. So it was a community effort in those regards.
Outside of the authors you've done and the other books that you've done, there's not that big of, it's amazing that there's not that many of these kinds of books out there. Like there's no annotated, well, I was going to say there's no annotated Moby Dick, but that would take, I mean, I don't know how many volumes you would need for an annotated Moby Dick, but it is amazing to have this. It's for me, that's the greatest contribution, is that you could literally just have your annotated Sherlock Holmes and be endlessly informed about all kinds of things, about all the stories.
Well, thank you.
Just 3 volumes.
That was the aim. I tried for inclusivity.
Yeah.
The right noun. I had a wide net for source material. Don Hobbs and I discovered each other at some point early in the process, that we were the 2 vacuum cleaners of Science Society publications. I have virtually complete runs of probably 30 or 40 different Science Society publications that many people don't even know exist.
Mhm.
Things like naval signals. These are there are some science societies that put out newsletters that are basically, hey, we had a picnic and Monica brought this and Ed brought that, and then there are still, fortunately, some journals besides the Sherlock Holmes Society Journal and the BSI that are doing scholarly publications. The big ones are Canadian Holmes and the Sydney Passengers Log, but there were many others, and they have, unfortunately, they've all pretty much gone by the by. Those are really the only two major ones left. But there was a tremendous amount of scholarship being written and published in those journals that wasn't in books, that never got the books, and was hard to track down. The University of Minnesota was very helpful in filling a few gaps. I had very, very few gaps. I being acquisitive, I wanted to own these things and be able to go look at them. I also developed a methodology early on that stood me well. I mean, there are 60 stories here, and I was producing the annotations one story at a time, as opposed to, I'm going to find all the references to mental health and put all those in. So that would have been nearly impossible.
Yeah.
So I developed a checklist that was the sources that I needed to review. Some of the great books like Dakin's Sherlockian Commentary, or H.W. Bell's books, or and so on. And for every story, I would go back through those original materials and comb through them to see what they had to say about this particular story. So it stood me in good stead to use that kind of methodology.
Well, for those, and I know we definitely have in our audience some people who are new to Sherlock Holmes, and this is the kind of the annotate. I mean, you can just get editions that have some footnotes and endnotes in them, and some of them are really wonderful. The new Oxfords that have just come out are, I think, really well done. But for a real deep dive, I would highly recommend one of these full annotated editions, and I can't recommend less as highly enough. But
let me say a word about the new Oxford ones, because they're worth mentioning, and they're a little disappointing. Not a lot disappointing, but a little disappointing. They're a big improvement over the previous Oxford editions in that they clearly recognize the Sherlockian movement. The original Oxford editions had absolutely no material drawn from what we will think of as Sherlockian publications, or even books of commentary that played the game. They just sort of ignored all that. If it wasn't academic, they weren't interested. Now, the new Oxford paperback editions they're not heavily annotated, but they do reference some of the Sherlockian material. It's not nearly as rich as it could be. I'm jonesing to do a new edition of mine because it's been almost 20 years already, and that means there's been 20 years more material produced on the subject. But it's worth looking at the new Oxford ones. There are one or two. I mean, I sort of looked at it with that very narrow focus of, have they done what I want to do? Have they now updated? The answer is no. They clearly haven't. That wasn't their aim. But they're nice additions with some notes.
Would you do a new one, like a complete new one, or would you do a supplement? Because supplement would be difficult. But
the mechanics are, that's not up to me. I mean, Norton. I've actually talked to Norton about it, and they've said, you know what, and this is the curse. The books continue to sell well.
Yeah.
And, we don't want to spend the money to produce a new edition. We'll talk about it again, probably, God willing, in 5 years. And we'll talk about a 25th anniversary edition, maybe. but no, I mean, there are more illustrations. I mean, I found wonderful sources of illustrations that we didn't have back then. There's been movies, etc., that I could use for illustrative material. And as I said, there's been just a lot more really fine Sherlockian commentary. This is not over. The game is so far from over. Every time you think that somebody has written a definitive article on something, people turn up new material. They have new slants on old material, and it's wonderful. It's wonderful to see.
Well, thank you for telling us about these and letting especially the newcomers to Sherlock Holmes.
I forgot to mention, I'm sorry, one more thing I wanted to mention, which is to talk about really annotated. Should look at the Green Bag's annual Baker Street Almanac.
Yeah.
They are producing one story per year, and as a sort of team annotation. And they're letting me add, they cite my annotations, but they've added, this is a perfect example of who knew you could add another 40 or 50 annotations to something that I already annotated. So
yeah, for people that look that up, if you look up Baker Street Almanac Green Bag, you'll find this. I don't have a link for it handy.
Yeah, I actually owe them an annotation for this year's story. So we'll figure it out.
Well done. Well, thanks, Les. Before we move on to sign of 4, let me tell you all about my drink today. We have specialty cocktails for each show. Sherlock-tails, created by one of our co-hosts, Mary Alcaro, who will join me on our next episode, actually. And this week's is called the 7% Solution. And it's basically a 7 and 7, it's classic old 70s cocktail. It's Seagram 7 and 7-Up. I added a dash of bitters in mine. I've got my maraschino cherries floating down there because it's a drink, and it's a 70s drink, and I thought it needed them. But it's actually got a rim on top of sugar and poppy seeds that I put on top there. So and while it's morphine free, we do not encourage consuming large quantities of poppy seeds if you anticipate being drug tested in the near future. You can find this recipe in the YouTube description for the episode. I also send out the recipe by email every week for those who are registered for the show. You can register at the Sherlock Mondays homepage on rosenbach.org. We've also shared a PDF of a facsimile of the Sign of 4 as it was originally published in Lippincott's monthly magazine in 1890. You can download that on the Rosenbach's Sherlock Mondays page. And then starting next week, I'll be putting up a little facsimile of all of the Strand short stories with all of Paget's illustrations in them, just as they were kind of, the same layout every week for you to read for the show. Well, a little setup here for this. We just did Study in Scarlet, and which Doyle publishes in 1887 in the Beaton's Christmas Annual, and in the kind of 2 years before Sign of 4 is published, Doyle is still a practicing physician. He's actually just starting to study some for ophthalmology. He hasn't made the trip to the continent yet, but he's starting to study to be an ophthalmologist, and that'll be his specialty. But he's really trying to develop this writing career, and it starts to take off. He has the Firm of Girdlestone novel, unsold for a couple of years, but finally published before Sign comes out. Micah Clark gets published. It's a historical novel, which is really what Conan Doyle wants to do, right, guys? Like, he wants to be a historical novelist. And he's written Micah Clark, which is about the Monmouth Rebellion in 1685 in England. He's begun writing Angels of Darkness. That's the play about the Mormon section of Study in Scarlet. He finishes it, but it never gets produced. Mystery of Klumer gets published. That's another novel, which he kind of disowns, which is a really weird novel, but it's fun, and I've read it and I enjoy it. And he's begun writing The White Company, which is about the 100 Years' War, another historical novel. And then in 1888, he's invited to have dinner with Joseph Marshall Stoddard, managing editor for Lippincott's monthly magazine, based in Philadelphia, which I love. And then they've decided they're going to also simultaneously publish in London. And they have, and he invites I'm sorry, I spoiled it. He invites Doyle to have lunch with him at the Langham Hotel. And also invited is an Irish journalist, an NP. We don't care about this. Thomas Patrick Gill. But Monica, who else is coming?
Oh, the most fabulous human being on the planet at that time, Oscar Wilde.
Oscar Wilde is. He's written a couple plays, collection of fairy tales. He's becoming very well known as an aesthete, as a promoter of aestheticism. That kind of art is about beauty, not purpose, art for art's sake. I mean, he's becoming well known for this, and he invites them all to a meal and to kick around ideas for his for this new magazine.
And odd choices, by the way. I mean,
yeah,
I'm not sure.
It's not well known yet.
Scholarship about sort of why Stoddard picked Doyle to be part of that group. Wilde was an obvious choice, but Study in Scarlet had been pirated already. Yeah. But I don't know that it was. I mean, Dorothy Sayers liked to say that it exploded like a bombshell when A Study in Scarlet was published, but somebody else more intelligently said, yeah, like a dud bombshell. It wasn't exactly a hot ticket.
Well, I mean, The Beaten sold out, but it probably just sold out because it was a Christmas annual.
Yeah,
and
it wasn't a big print run,
but certainly didn't make a great impression. But even Wilde himself, he had a collection, The Happy Prince, the fairy tales, but he was not known as a fiction writer yet. Had a couple plays, but not the plays that we think of had happened yet. But Stoddard had his eye on a couple writers, and it's amazing that he chose who he chose, and that he was right in choosing.
Well, fortunately, as I tell this story, Doyle said to himself, Watson said he had another manuscript.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And he decides to bring back Sherlock and Watson. And if he hadn't, if Doyle hadn't not only not been asked to write a story, because Stoddard doesn't say write a Sherlock Holmes story, he just says, I want you to write some fiction. And had Doyle not said, had not decided on a Sherlock story, it probably never would have continued. And, and luckily it did. He may have just been a moderately successful historical novelist and magazine story writer that, only people who, study things in the 1890s and early 20th would know. Maybe he would become a more famous spiritualist. Who knows?
Quite possibly.
Because he was already into that at this stage of his life.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a fascinating story here of a sliding door of Conan Doyle missing his cab or something, not getting to the lunch, and Sherlock Holmes disappears.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, he did write, and he's offered £100 for at least 40,000 words. I think I'm correct on those numbers. And it's just for magazine use, not for the book or serial rights. So he's like, he can't believe the deal he's getting.
Those Americans,
these Philadelphia publishers, they're just throwing
crazy Americans. Yeah.
So he comes up, he's, it's first he's thinking of The Sign of the Sixth and the problem of the Sholtos. It winds up, that's the problem of the Sholtos is the subtitle. It's published as The Sign of the Four, or the problem of the Sholtos. In February 1890, they're both Philadelphia and London, in the monthly magazine. It's 25 cents in America, and in Britain it's 1 shilling it cost. When it's Sign of the Four, and that second the gets dropped in the first book edition, I'm pretty certain. Is that correct? The first book edition just comes out as The Sign of Four, and then it's just kind of become the Doyle never corrected it. He didn't mind. And that's what it's been known as since. And let's start talking about it. If we don't get through the first 7 chapters, which is the goal tonight, we will start where we leave off next week. Chapter 1, The Science of Deduction, which was the chapter title in Study in Scarlet, but Doyle's got to remind everybody of what's, going on in this. Monica, do you have that handy? You want to read that first paragraph?
Oh, actually, I don't even need to read it. I can do this more or less verbatim. Sherlock Holmes took the bottle from the corner of the mantelpiece and his hypodermic syringe from its neat Morocco case. With his long, white, nervous fingers, he adjusted the delicate needle and rolled back his left shirt cuff. For some time, his eyes rested upon his sinewy forearm and wrist, all dotted and scarred with innumerable puncture marks. Finally, he thrust the sharp point home, pressed down on the tiny piston, and sank back into the velvet-lined armchair with a long sigh of satisfaction. Do you want me to continue?
That's good. Let's just start with the first paragraph. That, especially for a newbie coming to Sherlock,
Mm-hmm.
it's the first sentence. And the first paragraph, he's is he a junkie? What's
Well, I believe that is kind of what Watson is wondering at this point as well. Is okay, so Sherlock Holmes is shooting up cocaine at this point. It's bold, it's right out there.
Mhm.
Whereas in A Study in Scarlet, he doesn't know him very well. He's still getting to know Sherlock Holmes, and he's theorizing that it's possible that Sherlock Holmes uses drugs, but it wouldn't fit his personality. And then straight out of the gate, first words, first paragraph, boom, here we are. Sherlock Holmes is shooting up cocaine
3 times a day.
Oh, for many months I had witnessed performance.
For many months, yes.
Yeah. It's a 7% solution. Holmes says, would you care to try it?
No,
Very
indeed.
casual he is with it.
In that era, it was very casual, though. This is something that was legal as compared to the horror that we kind of see today. That it's like, oh God, it's illegal. No, this is basically stuff that's normal. This is the stuff that was used for eye surgery. This is the stuff that was available. While it wasn't necessarily something that your average, we'll just say kind of your average British citizen would be using, it was fairly mainstream and readily available, and it didn't have kind of that, we'll just say we didn't have that cultural bias against this casual use of cocaine at this time.
I think somewhere in here I quoted from the 1888 Britannica article on cocaine, in which you talked about how cocaine was a useful muscle relaxant. Regularly, the coca leaves were used by natives in South America as a stimulant to help them work harder. And it says nothing about addiction. Nobody really knew about the addictive aspects. It's also, by the way, unclear whether Holmes was shooting it up or taking it subcutaneously. But it's a confusing thing, because Watson elsewhere talks about drowsiness, not here, but in one of the short stories, about the drowsiness of the drug. That's not cocaine.
Although it could be cocaine withdrawal. And that's how I've interpreted it, just because it's convenient, because when playing the game. Watson does ask morphine or cocaine. So you've got your narcotic and you've got your stimulant.
What is it today, morphine or cocaine? Yeah. Does that mean he was going back and forth?
I've kind of assumed that would be the case. And to be perfectly honest, if one is using both simultaneously, the effects are extrapyramidal, so they kind of amplify. And so that's in modern verbiage, that's called speedballing.
Yeah, that's a speedball, right?
Yeah, that's speedball.
Which is super dangerous.
Which is super, super dangerous, but also for someone who is seeking, as well, we'll just say, as Holmes alludes to a little bit later on in a couple paragraphs down, that he's seeking brain stimulation. That's gonna light your brain up like New York City.
As you know, and it's true that it's legal. People do it, and people that you might not expect would do it may do it, but Watson has an issue with it. And he clearly sees it as something dangerous to do, and is trying to warn him of that. But it's not the addictive thing, right? They hadn't really, the addiction part wasn't really, addiction wasn't part of the equation for the medical dangers of cocaine yet, right?
No, it was not.
Not for cocaine. The morphine, I think, did they know that it was addictive?
Ish. I mean, they knew that there was, that was kind of like problematic, because morphine, of course, is derived from opium dens, and, all the, we'll just say kind of all the bias against, individuals who take the seed of the poppy. It really wasn't part of the equation. But what Watson was concerned about is basically like how it would change his brain, that it could end up, even though Holmes is seeking boredom alleviation, he's seeking excitement, he's seeking stimulation, by doing so and putting this drug in his system, that, he's risking, his brain function as a result.
Is Watson hinting at it as a kind of moral failing here, do you think, at all? Because that seems to be the way that other Victorian texts seem to deal with it, but I'm not sure I really read the moral failing here, or if I just assume that.
I think there's maybe just a tinge of moral failing, but mostly Watson's looking at it as a medical problem. Insert drug, brilliant man, how is this going to affect him long term, especially if he's using 3 times a day for many months? That's not exactly, we'll just say, amateur quantities and frequencies here.
Is this 7% a very small amount? Is this?
Well, and that's where it gets a little bit nebulous here. So 7% is essentially 7%, cocaine, 90%, water. If we're looking at the, the solution of cocaine that Holmes would have been injecting, whether it was intravenously or subcutaneously. The issue is sometimes like a matter of potency. How pure is the cocaine that he's using? And there's like no real indication for that. But so if we assume a reasonably high level of purity, even 7% watered down, to 7% can be pretty potent. That said, though, is that if we look at it as we'll just say weak solution, one of the points that I make in my essay, which is kind of a riff off of this, which I call the 7% evaluation, doing a diagnostic analysis from the DSM-5 of Holmes's cocaine use in the canon, coffee or caffeine of any kind. So my preferred form of caffeine here. There are a lot of people who, if they don't get their morning cup of coffee, will experience, caffeine withdrawal headaches. It's a very minor withdrawal, but it is withdrawal nonetheless. And you can experience that even if you're just having 1 cup of coffee a day. And that's not, it doesn't matter whether it's a weak or potent solution of coffee, you're experiencing withdrawal nonetheless.
He notes that Holmes will have the black reaction comes upon you when he, I guess when he's off of it.
It's with withdrawal is not fun. And then also, to be perfectly honest, when people are high as a kite off of cocaine, that's not always a very pleasant experience for those around them anyway.
Yeah. For me, this kind of continues that thing that Watson Doyle has started in Study in Scarlet, this kind of bohemian theme that, like, he's not creating these kind of very straight and narrow kind of middle class regular guy kind of characters. They're it's, and Bohemia is mentioned constantly, but the next story is Scandal Bohemia, but the Bohemian is artsy, slightly decadent, kind of maybe even close to degenerate kind of character. We see hints of that in Study, and then this seems to be the kind of further. Holmes is he's a guy that gets high and solves cases. That's not, I mean, it's not a respectable endeavor in a sense.
Oh yeah. Well, and not only that, but it's like he's also rationalizing and justifying it to a degree. I mean, and I can appreciate this. He's not really getting high, so to speak. I mean, he's stimulating his brain, but he's not using it for the sake of the high. He's using it basically, for the most part, to kind of alleviate the boredom of of commonplace life.
My mind rebels at stagnation.
Exactly. It's the
you
same
know that
thing.
whole speech too. Do it.
Oh yeah, my mind rebels at stagnation. Give me problems, give me work, give me the most abstruse cryptogram, the most intricate analysis, and I am my own proper atmosphere. I abhor the dull routine of existence. I crave mental exaltation, and that is why I've chosen my particular profession, or rather created it, for I am the only one in the world.
Yes.
Yeah. Essentially, he's looking to basically make his brain light up because he's bored. That doesn't mean that he's not using it to get high, but the high is essentially self-medicating, like his boredom, or the things that are going on in my head, or going on in his head, much like, using caffeine for me for years to self-medicate my ADHD before I was prescribed appropriate pharmaceuticals, to address that. So it's not much different, but he's self-medicating in his own way.
Well, then we get in this chapter, which is interesting, that we get this little bit of, kind of recap from the last Sherlock Holmes story, that we have to be reminded of who these characters are. And he talks about the Jefferson Hope case, and Watson gives that, I've written a pamphlet on this. We're reminded, because
available at your local bookstore,
I mean, it had been published, but odds are people hadn't read this, right? I mean, people picking up Lippincott's, his readership was not that high, right? Sorry to pun on high there, but they hadn't, not many people would know this yet. So we get this kind of in-text advertisement for Study in Scarlet, and then the whole idea of the ideas that were all kind of laid out in Study in Scarlet about detection, and he doesn't like how, well, we have to give the other famous line there. You have that there, Les? You have attempted the Watson's story. Honestly, I cannot congratulate you upon it.
Right. Detection is, or ought to be, an exact science, and should be treated in the same cold and unemotional manner. You've attempted to tinge it with romanticism, which produces much the same effect as if you worked a love story or an elopement into the fifth proposition of Euclid.
And you have a nice note on what the fifth proposition of Euclid is, I recall, in your there, which we don't need to know, because it's the idea of it. It's an abstruse kind of, mathematical, formula. Doesn't need a love story. But it does for the publishing world. This is one of the things we talked about Study in Scarlet last week too, is that, why the Mormon segment? Well, because this was needed to be an attractive story to be published in a magazine annual, and you've got to include that stuff. So, well,
shortly after that, in this, about a paragraph or two later, is, I think, one of the most important problems of the canon here, which is that Watson says, I made no remark, however, but sat nursing my wounded leg.
Oh, wasn't it the shoulder in Study in Scarlet?
Wasn't it the shoulder in Study in Scarlet?
Yeah. It prevented him from walking. It ached wearily at the change of weather. In Study, it's there I was in Study in Scarlet. It's there I was struck on the shoulder by a Giselle bullet, which shattered the bone and grazed the subclavian artery. But also, I want to know too that, like, he gets enteric fever, and he's convalescing, and he's very ill. So Watson's whole health problems aren't just that, but it's the leg all through this. And we'll hit it again later when he gives a specific leg or ankle issue. But you're right, Les. That's
Yeah, and here, I mean, this isn't like I sat nursing my wounded leg because I tripped last week in the kitchen. He
Yeah.
specifically says a Jezebel bullet went through it. So this is our first example of how Watson, while he wants to plug his own work, doesn't bother to reread it.
Or he was bending over and got shot through both.
Well, I'm if we're going to dive in there, Monica, I'm a great fan of the Laurie King theory. That is a nice theory, the bullet passing through leg and shoulder at the same time. But I like Laurie's theory that the Jezebel bullets were basically homebrew. They were made out of scrap metal by the soldiers. And yes, and when it left the barrel, it split into two bullets.
I like that idea. I still like the idea of Watson bending over, though.
Yeah.
And why might he have been bending over? Yes,
we could get into this whole JFK conspiracy magic bullet thing going on here. I love this. And this is, I mean, part of the charm of and part of the fun of doing, these kinds of things is figuring out this stuff. But the other thing I wanted to mention too is that before that, the fact that Watson mentioned you're reading a fictional story, and within that fictional story, the character says, I wrote this other story called Study in Scarlet. And I love that Doyle plays the game from the very beginning and kind of creates that world for us to accept as a real world, because his characters operate in the same world as his readers do. And that will continue to go on here.
Mm-hmm. Doyleception.
What is that?
Oh, Doyleception, layers within layers
Doyleception.
within layers, like Inception.
I like that. Well, before we continue, let me take a quick break to tell everyone to learn more about the Rosenbach. You can visit rosenbach.org. We host a variety of on-site and online programs and courses, and always welcome questions from listeners about how to use our collections. Our holdings are always accessible to researchers who make a free appointment to visit our reading room. The Rosenbach's community reaches all around the globe, brought together by our love for history, rare books, manuscripts, and the arts. I hope you will consider supporting the Rosenbach and Sherlock Mondays by donation, which you can do so at our website, or by becoming a member. Membership gives you free museum admission, discounts on programs and courses, and exclusive invitations to member-only events. You can learn more about how to become a member on our website, and I really can't stress how important your support is. So if you haven't made a donation or joined as a member, or if you've already done that and have the ability to make a further donation, I would be so grateful. You can also join us on Facebook. We have a group page, Sherlock Mondays, for lots more Sherlockian info, news, links, conversation, and fun. There's an audio podcast version of this show. Look for the Rosenbach podcast, Sherlock Mondays, wherever you get your podcasts. The audio podcast for the show drop 1 week after these videos do. And you can always write to me at epettit@rosenbach.org. I love to hear from our audience. I've heard from a lot of you already, and thank you for all the good words about the show. When Sherlock Mondays comes to a close with the adventure of the empty house next year, we have one more Sherlockian biblio-venture to take you on. We're having an exclusive pay-only series on the Hound of the Baskervilles. It will be 8 episodes available by paid subscription only that will run on the Mondays in May and June after this series ends. Same format with the co-host and myself. Registration is not yet open. Stay tuned. In the coming weeks, I will let you know how you can register for that. And from time to time, we're going to give away some books. And today, we're giving away a signed copy of Leslie Klinger's Annotated Frankenstein. I'm going to put on the official Deerstalker when I do the giveaways. The person who answers the question first in the chat, in the live chat on YouTube, will win this great edition of Frankenstein. And this week it's going to be a Rosenbach trivia question. So it's about the Rosenbach. So it's not the easiest, one to answer, maybe. Well, unless you're a Rosenbach aficionado. here's the question. As a child, Dr. Rosenbach, our founder, ASW Rosenbach, had an uncle who was an antiquarian book dealer. And what was the first and last name of that uncle? That's the question. Dr. Rosenbach's uncle, who was an antiquarian book dealer. And I could tell you, he was a great collector of Americana. As a bookseller, Dr. Rosenbach's uncle kind of hated to sell what he loved. So according to the Edwin Wolfe biography of Rosenbach, each encounter with a customer was a case of a buyer turned salesman. And after he died at the age of 86 in 1903, Dr. Rosenbach sold all of his uncle's books. We have somebody with the correct answer there. It looks like it is Joseph Gonzalez. Joseph, you have won. After Uncle Moses died at the age of 86 in 1903, Dr. Rosenbach sold all his books in a catalog entitled A Collection of Valuable Americana Gathered by the late Moses Pollock Esquire, the oldest bookseller in the United States. And J.P. Morgan bought some of that collection. And some of that collection, Dr. R bought himself, because it was really about, he was creating the value of these books on the market. So he purchased a lot of it by himself to give them that value. And some of those we actually still have in our collection, some of Uncle Moses's collection. But Joseph Gonzalez, you're the winner. Drop me a line at epettit@rosenbach.org, and I will get you a copy of this book signed by Les Klinger.
That was second prize, right? First prize is an unsigned copy.
That was first prize. People love that they'll get this from you, so I am sure. So this is actually not the one they'll get. This is my copy signed. What did you write in it? You wrote in my copy, it's personalized, it's alive. There you go. Thanks for a great conversation. So, and dated it in 2017. That was
Wow.
my first year at the Rosenbach. So
Time flies.
all right.
This first chapter has got so much good stuff in it in The Sign of Four. I mean, I love all of Holmes's monographs that come up in this chapter. There's so much material there for people to invent from. I mean, you know, this is the source of the ashes. You know, this is where we get the first vision of Holmes. He mentions the monograph somewhere in The Study in Scarlet, but he doesn't give the full title of it. But 140 forms of cigar ash.
Yes.
Wow.
Or tobacco ash, yes, not just the cigars, but
Right.
Cigarette, and pipe
tobacco.
tobacco. Yes. Which I can attest isn't really possible, but you know. But I love that it's there. But also he's written a monograph on tracing footsteps. He's written a monograph on the influence of a trade upon the form of the hand. With the lithotypes of the hands of slaters, sailors, cork cutters, compositors, weavers, and diamond polishers, which sounds a lot like Dr. Joseph Bell, right? This is the kind of thing that Dr. Bell, Doyle's, doctor from medical school, would do. He would look at people's hands and say like, oh, you have this profession.
This is a challenge for the collector to find these things.
Or for the writer to create these things.
How many are there? There are 3, 4, 7 altogether. All through the stories, I think we get 7 monographs. That's the list that I have. And then we get into, again, what happens in the opening of every story. We get this Holmes doing the trick, right? Saying something to Watson. This time it was, oh, you went to the post office, but you didn't deliver the telegram, or that you did dispatch a telegram. And then he has to explain how he did it, and Watson is, baffled, and Holmes explains it. But at the end of this chapter, again, is another one of these little monologues on Holmes and feeling stagnated, hence the cocaine. I cannot live without brain work. What else is there to live for? Not the cocaine, the brain work.
Exactly. That's why I said self-medicating.
Yeah.
Before we get to that, though, however, there's
the
actually
watch.
2 demonstrations in this chapter. And the watch is one that's, to me, is very important because
That's the second. Is that the next chapter? Or is that
No,
the,
that's still this
no, that's
chapter.
this one.
still
Yeah.
in this chapter.
The watch. Yeah, you're right.
And what it's important for is to understand, as I thought the BBC Sherlock series did not nearly as well, that this is a young man who is not yet really aware of his power. He has these powers. He's growing into them. He has to apologize to Watson here for treating the matter as an abstract problem when it turns out that he makes a very painful revelation to Watson. And he does it thoughtlessly. He does have the good sense to apologize, at least, which Benedict Cumberbatch probably wouldn't have.
Yeah, well, that's the sociopathy of that character versus the canonical Holmes.
Yeah, the canonical Holmes, I find that it was in study, and it's in this too, that he's concerned with Watson's feelings. And when he hurts his feelings, he apologizes and does something to make up for it, usually.
Yeah, I mean, and of course, there's that revelation about, the sad fact that Watson's brother was an alcoholic and basically died of alcoholism. That's hitting really close to the bone. But again, as pointed out, he apologizes, he takes ownership of it, realizes, oh God, I was thinking abstractly. So sorry, my dear fellow. And
he does have to be reminded of it, though, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is to me an illustration. I mean, Holmes is quite young still. This is 1887, and maybe we can talk about the dates, but it's not as early as A Study in Scarlet. Study in Scarlet, he's what, 27 maybe?
Yeah. Let's see, what, 1854.
Both late 20s.
Yeah.
It's about all that's about all I'll commit to.
Now he's in his mid
27. Yeah.
And he's been in practice for a while, we think. At this point, this is kind of a middle case. We don't want to get too deep into chronology, but this is probably 1887, around there. And so, he should know better by now, but he still stumbles. He still can hurt people with his powers. And I'm not sure I want to dwell on it much more, but I think it's an important scene for that.
It is. And then, but now Mary Morstan walks in. Miss Mary Morstan, she comes in and Watson.
Sorry, at this rate, we may get through 2 chapters.
Yeah, we'll get through. Don't worry. Watson gives this, like, the opening paragraph of this chapter. He gives this long description of what she looks like, and very detailed description. And then he says, in an experience of women which extends over many nations and 3 separate continents, Watson wants to tell us he's a lady man. I know how to appreciate a lady.
The hammer hits.
Oh, yes.
And he is immediately smitten with her. And it's interesting that she asks, then when she's going to do her case, she's going to explain to Holmes, she asks Watson to stay. And so there's the invitation that he needs, that, oh, sure, I'll, stay and hear this story. And I just want to stop for a moment here, because now we have several features at the start of the story that are going to recur. And this is the kind of formula that Doyle has come up with. You begin in Baker Street with an exchange between Holmes and Watson. And not all the stories do this, but most do. Then you have Holmes do an observational trick. Then, and almost always at some point, one of them is looking out the window. And sometimes that becomes part of the observation. Sometimes it's somebody, like, they frequently look out their windows, and then a client arrives and the case is stated. And this is this formula that Doyle comes upon really in this story more it really works wonders for him. Then he's able to kind of replicate this for the short stories that will come later, that he's created this format.
I like to think that Holmes, by the way, took a look at Watson in this scene and says, "State your business."
Yeah,
It's like,
stop eyeing her.
He can see that Watson is already hook, line, and sinker here.
I watched the Peter Cushing version of this from the 60s Sherlock Holmes, and he literally, Nigel Stock plays Watson. He literally does the up and down on her when she walks in the room. It's
so obvious, no game.
and it's creepy in that too, because he's a lot older than she is, the actor playing. They didn't come up, they're not like in the story, they're not old men in the story. So she begins to tell a story here, and it is a fascinating note that which I only noticed today. She tells about when her father came home from Indian service. He stopped at the Langham Hotel, and I like Doyle giving that little shout out there that, the Langham Hotel where he had lunch with Stoddard that came up with this story, that Doyle putting a little note in there about it. We're not going to get into details of her story, because we're not going to do plot synopsis here. But in her story, she does mention the letter. Then she gets this new envelope. She's gotten the pearls. Now, she gets this letter, and the letter says, "Be at the third pillar from the left outside the Lyceum Theater tonight at 7:00. If you are distrustful, bring 2 friends. You are a wronged woman and shall have justice. Do not bring the police. If you do, all will be in vain. Your unknown friend." 2 notes here. Number 1, it's July 7. We want to note that for later in the story. And then, so we think we know when this story is set. It's July 7, but we'll find out later. Maybe it's not. But the Lyceum Theater, which I love, because Les is also, as the annotator of the annotated Dracula, what's the Lyceum Theater connection that we can make here?
Well, of course, not only was there's so many connections. I mean, Bram Stoker was the manager of the Lyceum Theater, certainly knew Conan Doyle, probably was friends with him. Bram Stoker, by the way, had married a woman who had been courted by Oscar Wilde.
Mm-hmm.
He knew Wilde, and this is before Wilde decided to go in a different direction, to put it subtly.
Delicately.
Carefully, yes. So there were many connections between the Lyceum and Holmes and Doyle.
I love that it's Stoker's not only the manager of the Lyceum Theater, but he was then too. He started that in 1878. He begins that job, and he's there until Henry Irving, the great actor whose theater it is, dies in 02 or 03, I think it is. But Stoker did not know Doyle yet. They had not met yet. So but that we know. But they did wind up. You're right. They knew they weren't quite. They were kind of more professional. There's a great letter that exists from Doyle to Stoker after he reads Dracula for the first time, and he writes him this nice letter saying how much he loved the book. And then later Stoker does an in-depth interview for a feature in a newspaper in sometime in the early 1908. That's what it is. I have a date here. In 1908, he does an in-depth interview with him. So they kind of knew each other.
And I like to think that the Lyceum, in the back room, Stoker was kind of running a little salon. There was a circle of friends.
He'd set up all these dinners. Wilde used to go to them sometimes. Yeah.
There was all these writers. I mean, Stevenson, when he was there, and Kipling, and others who were they all knew each other. It's
amazing that all these authors know each other too. So
yeah, many of them played cricket together later on.
Yep.
Yeah.
Robert Parr, etc. They were all buddies and ran in the same social circles. So I was trying to think about how old is Mary Morstan at this time. We don't know exactly. Watson is probably 33, maybe a little older, maybe 35. Mary Morstan, let's see, in 1882, she had just taken on a governess position. So she may be 21 or 22 at that time, I'm thinking. So she's in her mid-20s, probably. So she's 10 years younger than Watson.
It could be as much as 10 years older than her. Yeah.
Yeah. She is a young lady, according to him. He doesn't call her a woman.
But what an attractive woman after she gives her story, and he is that, but that's what he says. What a very attractive woman after she leaves, obviously. And Holmes is I did not observe.
Oh, actually, it tells us here. He says she's 27. He reasons out at the end of the chapter that she's about 27.
Yeah. She's not terribly younger than him then. And but Holmes is, and Watson accuses him being an automaton, a calculating machine. And then Holmes has this great, bit about the most winning woman I ever knew was hanged for poisoning 3 little children for their insurance money. And the most repellent man of my acquaintance is a philanthropist who has spent nearly $250,000 upon the London poor. That, don't read, because for Holmes, it's you're in danger of, affecting your judgment on a case if you start to think about how beautiful or repellent maybe somebody is. And then the chapter ends though with Watson thinking, not only is he he's trying to figure her age, but what was I, an army surgeon with a weak leg and a weaker banking account, that I should dare to think of such things. So
Watson is sitting here like getting married in his own head. It's kind of precious.
But he's afraid he can't, and then other problems will hit. But he's and again, we have more reminders. We have this in Study, and we had it in this story that Watson as a character is kind of frail. Watson as a character is constantly reminding us that he can't exert himself, that he's not the heroic, run around, do things. Holmes is all that. But Watson is right now unable to do those kinds of things. Chapter 3, In Quest of a Solution. Holmes already has kind of figured this case out right off the bat, right? He's got a theory for the solution of the case already. And Watson's like, what, you've solved it already? And Holmes is like, well, yeah, come on. I mean, we have all this information here. And then we get the whole, it's the Indian Army and the Andaman Islands. Again, we have another story with kind of roots in, the first story, but just because of Watson's military service, we get these kind of roots in British Empire and what that means and how that affects, not just the world, but like people in their individual lives, and how it's not always the best. There's a curse, it seems. There was a curse in the last one. There's a curse in this, in a sense. But I'm going to save talking about British Empire stuff for the second part when we really get into Jonathan Small's story. So unless you guys have something you wanted to comment on, I'm happy to always hear it. They're ready for, Holmes and Watson are ready for action. Watson has his heaviest stick and Holmes has his revolver as they're going out to meet Mary at the Lyceum Theater. And she now brings a map. Oh, I love maps. Did you put a picture of one of the maps in your edition, didn't you, Les? Or
yeah, they're on maps. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, there's a map that's a plan of a building, and it's and then it's got. It's a shame this wasn't included in the original. What a missed opportunity for Lippincott to not put a map in the original, with the sign of the four and these very rough, coarse characters which we don't know what exactly it is. All we get is that it's a hieroglyphic, like 4 crosses in a line with their arms touching. So, I mean, you can picture what it is. It's just 4 crosses, but they're all touching. And it's the sign of the 4, Jonathan Small, Muhammad Singh, Abdullah Khan, and Dost Akbar. And the names don't work, right? Am I, Monica? Do you know that the names don't line up for like, they shouldn't be named this, right?
Well, I mean, they shouldn't be named that. I'm just thinking is that a lot of that is, and I don't know if this is what you're getting at, but more Muslim versus Hindi. But
he's got this mishmash going on.
I play cricket with a bunch of guys who have emigrated from India and Pakistan and Bangladesh, and there's very distinct, we'll just say, differences in terms of naming conventions and such. So.
But for Doyle, it's just like Thaddeus Sholto later. It's just he's in love that this Oriental idea.
For him. Yeah, it flows for him, so it works, even if it wouldn't be realistic.
Well, they're off to meet her. They're off to meet Mary, and it's a September evening. Did you have a note on this, Les? Now it's a September evening. It was July 7 when she got the note.
Sure.
Clearly 2 months haven't passed, and this is the fun that you can do in an annotated edition is come up with ways that is changed. But actually, Doyle knew this, and he actually said, "Oh, I think this might have been in your edition, Les." That Doyle wrote a letter or wrote to Stoddart and said that, "Oh, we messed up the dates." So I guess they didn't have a good copy editor at Lippincott's at the time.
Yeah, I did it. I mean, the dating is so confusing here. I did a whole appendix on the date of the sign of 4. Some people have placed it in July, some have moved it to September. Nobody knows who to believe here.
But it's this chapter, it's this paragraph with the September evening that I just want to read these few sentences, because this to me is a big setup for what the stories become. The day had been a dreary one, and a dense, drizzly fog lay low upon the great city. Mud-colored clouds drooped sadly over the muddy streets. Down the Strand, the lamps were but misty splotches of diffused light which threw a feeble circular glimmer upon the slimy pavement. The yellow glare from the shop window streamed out into the steamy, vaporous air and threw a murky, shifting radiance across the crowded thoroughfare. There was, to my mind, something eerie and ghost-like in the endless procession of faces which flitted across these narrow bars of light. Sad faces and glad, haggard and merry, like all humankind, they flitted from the gloom into the light, and so back into the gloom once more. I mean, that's the image of Sherlock Holmes story, like the setting of Holmes stories. I feel like that's the kind of what Starrett was getting at, and it's always.
I was about to say, Starrett's 221B.
Right?
The yellow fog swirls past the window pane as night descends upon this fabled street.
Well, keep in mind, I mean, Holmes. This is a constant theme. You didn't point it out, Ed, in chapter 1 that Holmes says, "Stand at the window here. Was ever such a dreary, dismal, unprofitable world?
Yeah.
See how the yellow fog swirls down the street and drifts across the dun-colored houses. What could be more hopelessly prosaic and material?" So yes, I just produced a lightly annotated edition of "In the Fog," a wonderful short story, really more a novella almost, by Richard Harding Davis. And talked about Doyle's use of fog and others, how the fog really became the symbol of mystery.
For those who don't know, Richard Harding Davis was a best-selling author in Doyle's time, right? The late 19th, early 20th. And it's become this, and it's interesting because it's mentioned earlier in the story. Now it's mentioned here. This isn't going to get past a modern, editor. You've already done this. You're not going to repeat it here. But the effect of Doyle doing this in these stories like this really has come to create the scene for us and emphasize it, and I think it really works. They meet Mary at the Lyceum, and then they have to jump. Someone meets them there, and then they jump into another cab, and then Holmes gets to again show another kind of ability of his. It's just as they're riding along.
The gazetteer, yes.
Yeah, that he knows. And Watson says, "I lost my bearings and knew nothing, save that we seem to be going a very long way." Sherlock Holmes was never at fault, however, and he muttered the names as the cab rattled through squares and in and out by tortuous by streets. And we get a little of that Holmes, like, running through the streets as they're riding through them. Again, a thing that becomes, it's not just that Holmes is brilliant and can do this kind of stuff, like he's got a map in his head of the city and can just run through it as they're riding in a thing, but also it's also Watson's assertion that he can't do it, right? And that's the difference, and that's the crux of the relationship, that Watson can't do these things and has to say, "I can't do them," and Holmes can. And as a reader, we're like Watson. Well, some of us aren't. Some of us can do that trick, I guess.
Depends on the town.
Yeah, there you
go. Now, Doyle, at this point, let's see, in 1889 or so, when this is being published, I mean, he's still relatively new to London himself.
Yeah, he doesn't know London. This is just...
he pulled out of Bradstreet's or Baedeker's or whatever and did this, yeah.
As we would have to do. They arrive at their destination, and that's chapter 4, the story of the bald-headed man, and we're introduced to Thaddeus Sholto and his obsession with the Eastern world. He says, "A small place, miss, but furnished to my own liking, an oasis of art in the howling desert of South London." And the place is just a ridiculous, pretentious, every Eastern, thing you can imagine in there.
All I can think of at this point is a modern read that Thaddeus Sholto is so coded gay that it's like screams off the page now.
Yes. Well, he's coded Oscar Wilde.
Is he? Okay. Yeah, exactly. I mean,
he is Oscar Wilde.
He's this ridiculous, pretentious aesthete, right? And is this the effect of Doyle meeting Wilde and thinking that this is the kind of person he's portraying? He smokes a hookah too instead of a pipe. Instead of the good old British, briar pipe, he's got a hookah. My
mind has gone blank. Who's the illustrator, the famous illustrator of the Yellow Book and things like that? That's what this sounds like. It sounds like one of those bizarre, sort of vaguely
Aubrey Beardsley. You thinking?
Yes, Beardsley.
Yeah,
one of the illustrations of Beardsley. You can just say Salome dancing through the house.
And Sholto's, he is. He's very odd, and I don't know if that is coded gay for Doyle or just coded this kind of decadent aesthete person who might not necessarily mean sexuality, but they certainly cross over a lot.
There's also a lot, and you're going to get to it later, you said, but there's also a lot of the cultural empire stuff here.
Yeah.
Remember, this is the son of a man who spent his days with John Company in India, and probably dad himself relished the good old days when he lived in India and had a dozen servants for £1, £1 a month, and so on. And so he has, to some extent, Captain Sholto and now the sons have replicated the good old days that Dad was trying to preserve.
Yeah. The price that they will pay for it. like, because there's a curse that comes with all of this, that he has brought back with him. Sholto tells the story of his father, and I also like this note too, this idea too, that Sherlock Holmes stories are about people telling stories. Everybody has to come on the scene and tell their own little story that we hear in full from a character, and then the narratives are kind of compiled up. And this is cool too, because we get Sholto's story of the side, and then later we'll get Jonathan Small's story, and to see how they kind of, match up. For here, it's clearly the family, histories are tied to the British Empire and the issues that go along with that.
The mutiny and all the the bloodshed. So
at least he's nice, and he asks her if she minds the tobacco smoke. He asks Mary, but then he goes on smoking a hookah. But then the story ends with the father is Sholto's father is going to tell them where the treasure is. Put your ears down to my mouth. The treasure is hidden in. You die. Like, was it Monty Python and the Holy Grail? Yes, he dies at the moment where he's going to tell them the treasure's hidden, because he sees Small in the window, and then that's his story. And I love this image too of Sherlock Holmes listening, because we get this a lot in Sherlock stories. Sherlock Holmes leaned back in his chair with an abstracted expression and the lids drawn low over his glittering eyes, and this kind of listening pose that he does when people come to tell him stories. Well, now he's told that there's a treasure and Miss Morton could have it, and he's willing to give it to her, even though his brother doesn't want him to, and they're going to go and confront his brother over this. But this all leads Watson at the end of this chapter to this is a like as if his poor army pension and game leg weren't enough. Now Miss Morstan is going to be the richest heiress in England, and he has no shot at marrying this young beautiful girl that he knows he's going to marry right away. Like, he's seen her and knows it. My heart turned as heavy as lead within me. They're off to Pondicherry Lodge, the Sholto home in Norwood, right? Is it Norwood, or am I just remembering that?
No, it's in Norwood.
It's in Norwood.
Don't we want to say at least something about this wonderful scene with the letter that Major Sholto gets a letter from India, which essentially kills him. And what was this letter? What was in it? Who wrote it? We have no idea.
Do you think it's from Small?
No.
No? You don't think it's from Small saying, like, I'm coming to get you? Or is it well, the only other answer is it's from maybe it's from someone. Is it from Morstan maybe telling him that Small has escaped? But I don't know if the timeline quite works out.
It doesn't. So the letter is 1882. Small must have escaped before that, 1879 or 1880. So who is this letter from? We don't know. It's a mystery. Maybe it was from Small. It's possible.
Mm-hmm.
Ian McQueen thought so, but
Sherlock
kind of drops that whole subject. He never investigates that.
What's the Ian McQueen book? Is that Detective?
Yeah, Sherlock Holmes Detected.
Sherlock Holmes Detected. But that's the letter that he gets to warn him that everything's not right here, and he needs to be careful of his treasure. They go off to, and are we ready? We go off to Pondicherry Lodge in chapter 5, and they're confronted by Bartholomew Sholto's servant McMurdo, who is his guard, a former pugilist, who is guarding, and he won't let anyone in. I can't, he says, it doesn't matter. I must stick to regulations. I can let you in, but your friends must stop where they are. Nobody comes in if they're not on the list until Sherlock says,
"Oh, yes, you do, McMurdo. You know me."
me.
And basically points out that, Holmes, smacked him upside the head, knocked out a tooth.
I once fought three rounds with you on the night of your benefit 4 years back. Not Mr. Sherlock Holmes. How could I missed you? You gave me that cross, hit of yours under the jaw. And then he says, "In you come, sir. In you come, you and your friends." Apparently, he's not allowed to let anybody in unless they have previously punched him in the face. That seems to be his bar for like who he can let in. Like, if you punched me in the face before, well, that's okay. Now I can let you in, even though my master didn't say you could come in. Now he's going to let him in. But
by the way, I mean, we did skip over at the end of the last chapter what we're after here, the Agra treasure. That
yes,
it's like $100 million in today's money. I mean, this would have made her. Watson describes her as this would have made her the richest heiress in England. Today, he would say, well, behind J.K. Rowling, but
But she's going to be unbelievably rich, and that's what this treasure amounts to. And that's why Watson's so upset that now she's out of his league.
Out of his league.
McMurdo invites them in then, and right away it is, there's something wrong. I think the housekeeper is crying, and they go up, and Sholto is shocked himself that he comes down saying, that there's something wrong. And then Holmes takes charge, and it's just a simple line. Sherlock Holmes took the lamp and led the way, and that's the hero in the story, that he's going to take charge and go and see what's wrong here. They go up to the door. Miss Morton, Mary, however, has to remain behind with the frightened housekeeper.
Well, of course, you got to leave the ladies behind, because you cannot, bring them to see the possible horrors that are unknown horrors that await.
Watson's not going to take her into danger.
But before we get there, before he goes in the house, remember, we have this wonderful observation by Watson looking around at the yard. It looks as though all the moles in England had been let loose on it. I have seen something like it on the sort on the side of a hill near Ballarat. When did Watson get to Australia?
Yeah,
that would be the third continent then.
Yeah, he said 3 continents that he's been.
So Europe, Asia, and Australia. So, but that does. Oh, I missed that part with the Ballarat, because that gets in later with Black Jack.
It is, Doyle, though, really creating this more of a backstory for Watson than he can really fit into the life that he's given him. But also the idea that Watson maybe is the man of the world that, that he needs to be for this story, that he's got all this experience.
But to me, this is the example. This is a brilliant example of genius. And one of the things I annotated in my long career of annotating is Neil Gaiman's Sandman comics. And in one of the early issues, there is a scene in which there's a treasure chest that we see in Dream's Palace, as I recall, that has in it a little bottle with a city inside it, sort of a model of a castle and turrets and all that inside this bottle. It's not mentioned. It's just there in the background. 40 issues later, there's a story about this city in a bottle. And I asked Neil, where did it come from? What happened here? Was this? And he just said it just seemed like something that sort of belonged there back in issue 10. He didn't know why, it just belonged. And later he understood why it was there. And this to me is what Doyle's doing here. He's putting in things here that not even he quite understands why he's putting them in, I think.
Mhm.
But later he's going to say, oh yeah, that's genius.
Yep.
That's dictation from God.
That's
Which is
putting
the
so
way-
much into your story that you can call upon things later,
Yes.
which is brilliant.
And by the way, I mean, we should say a word or two now about Doyle's writing, and well, this is going to become much more of a theme, I suspect, when we get to the short stories, and we can talk about the manuscripts, because unfortunately, no scholars have seen the manuscript of Sign of the Four.
It exists though? Is in someone's collection?
Sort of. There was a private buyer in the Chicago area back in the 90s with this one. The manuscript is complete except for the front page, which is a reproduction.
Right. Front
Yeah.
page is at the University of California in San Diego. So,
Yep.
but what I was going to say is that when you look at Doyle's manuscripts, they are remarkable. They're remarkable because there's so few changes.
Yeah,
Just many of them.
Yeah.
And that's what I was talking about when I said dictation from God. This is, just sort of the whole story kind of appeared in his head, and he would just kind of flow it out onto the page.
Mhm.
So, I mean, we forget about the writing craft and the genius that goes into this when we get caught up in the Sherlockian aspects. But
Mhm. Watson was in Ballarat, and that will
Comes
come back
back
again.
later.
Yeah.
so anyway, just thought I'd
No,
point that
that's
out.
great. No, thank you. That's one of the reasons I want you to be on this is to say, stop, Ed, back it up. How about this? I love that. So Holmes takes charge, they go up, and then Holmes looks through the keyhole and he sees something odd in the room. And I love this reaction of Holmes. There is something devilish in this, Watson, said he, more moved than I had ever before seen him. That the corpse in there, which the reader will see in a moment, is such an unusual sight that even Holmes is kind of shaken by this in a sense. And they go in and then they go in, and these kind of is this horrible smile on his face, and he's completely stiffened, and we learn it's because he's been poisoned. And Holmes goes through the whole he begins to do the investigation of the scene here that will continue in the next chapter, but first, as soon as Watson looks at this, Watson's immediate. Well, he sees the sign of the four. There's a note paper there with the sign of the four on it, and Holmes sees the thorn that was poisoned, and Watson's reaction is, "This is all an insoluble mystery to me." It grows darker instead of clearer, and Holmes's reaction is that now it's clearer. Now that I've looked and seen these things, now it's becoming clear. And he went on about this in Study of the Scarlet too, about how the odd features of a crime make it more easy to put together than if they were not unusual.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be easier to solve a case with a dart from a blowgun than a case where the guy's been shot by a bullet. I mean, it's just
Distinct differences. I mean, uniqueness in here. It's not an English thorn, is it?
No.
What do they say when you hear hoofbeats? Don't think zebras.
Well, the next chapter, if we want to go there, Sherlock Holmes gives a demonstration, and now he really goes in. And then we discover this is we realize entirely we should have known, but this is a locked room mystery that Holmes is solving. Poe's Dupin solves and Murders in the Rue Morgue. This is a locked room murder
with a big hole in the roof.
Well, they don't know the hole's there at first, and then he sees the hole in the ceiling, and then there's a way out there. That's I mean, in Murders in the Rue Morgue, it wasn't really locked. It was the window closed in a way that made it appear locked. So, or that it's kind of self-locked when the window fell. So there's always a way out of the locked room. And you just have to find it, because, well, when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth, which is the great Holmes line here. But that's how you solve a locked room mystery. What I love for the investigation in this is how we follow Holmes and his method, and it's thrilling for Watson and the reader to watch and piece it all together. But I also it's so physical. Holmes is so physically active in investigating, as you know, Watson's describing him running around the room. Very active, going through the ceiling, and the way he investigates, and his hands moving, and that he's not the cerebral detective in a chair. He's not Dupin, right? Coming up with, figuring it all out. Dupin just kind of slowly walks around a room and looks at everything, and it's no problem. Sherlock is a very active investigator.
He's getting down, looking at the dust, looking at things from different angles, crouching down. This is it's active investigation, because if you think about it, there are certain things you can't see from sitting down or from standing from one particular position. So if you need to take a look at something from a different angle in order to see what might be, then that just lends itself to proper crime detection at this point. Good strategy.
Well, Holmes goes through the.
It's also just cornball, though. I mean, this is so stagey. The whole investigation of Holmes sort of crawling around there, and then, oh, wow, the guy stepped in creosote. Great. This is like the worst melodrama. This is worse.
Is it? No, well, but is it at the time, or is this become so, the formula that now it seems so cliched?
And I'm thinking it was fine at the time, and it's now by today's standards cliche. But then again, in my work as a therapist, I mean, maybe not quite actively getting around, but my whole job is to get people to look at things from a different perspective than their typical vista. So, this is I do the abstract version of what Sherlock is doing in this particular scene. Maybe not the creosote, but about getting people to consider alternative angles and perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, to me, this is, I'm sorry, Ed, you said this is one of your favorites. This is not, this doesn't strike me as one of the first class mysteries that we have in later stories.
But you're right, and not the reason why it is one of my favorites.
I mean, a pygmy, a blowgun, give me a break, it's like, today we would say the guy sat down and said, let's see, we can put these things on the cover. This will be great on Netflix. It'll be a terrific movie on Netflix. And the fact that he took, a few days to write it, it's just so melodramatic, cliched melodramatic, compared to some of the later stories, which are frankly much more subtle and clever. But give the guy a break. There's only a second try at writing a detective story.
It is, and I like the ally here that we will get to in the second half. It reminds me so much of Poe doing the orangutan in Murders. So that and I'm fine with that. So but Holmes finds these little footprints, right? And of course Watson's like, it was a child.
Child has done this horrid thing.
Which I think is funny.
Horror.
But
I don't know that, by the way, it's not outlandish to have said a child did it. This is, remember, the street Arabs have already been mentioned here. And think back to Fagin and his gang. Children are being employed to do a lot of dirty, rotten things at this time. And so it isn't like Watson's delusional to say a child did it.
No, but he is shocked by it. That, but then that's the point, that he shouldn't be shocked. You're right. He should think that like this could happen.
Yeah,
this,
well, I mean, it's thinking that it's a possibility, but of course, another demonstration of just how wrong Watson gets it.
But here's one of the things that makes me fall in love with this. It's Holmes' event. He whipped out his lens and a tape measure, hurried about the room on his knees, measuring, comparing, examining with his long, thin nose, only a few inches from the planks, and his beady eyes gleaming and deep set like those of a bird, so swift, silent, and furtive were his movements, like those of a trained bloodhound. I mean, it does ring as cliched now, and that's only because this is it. People, this is where we get that from.
Right. But this is also I also noticed that this is not a very attractive picture of Sherlock Holmes. This is not William Gillette or Benedict Cumberbatch, a handsome man doing his sleuthing. This guy really is an oddball.
Yeah.
Beak-nosed, bird-like eyes, etc. He said, and by the way, it makes the early illustrations look pretty darn good. They're pretty close to the truth. They're awful pictures. I mean, you look at the images of some of the early illustrations. This is pre-Paget, of course.
Yeah.
And you say, well, that's not Sherlock Holmes. Well, maybe it is.
And even the finally he broke out into a loud crow of delight. This isn't.
This guy's really an oddball.
Yeah, this isn't the reaction you're supposed to have, when you're investigating a murder. Well, he does bring Watson into the investigation in that he asks him, he consults with him, his kind of medical advice about, look at the body here. Can you tell me, put your hand on him, feel him, can you give me a kind of diagnosis? And Watson is quickly, death from some powerful vegetable alkaloid, some strychnine-like substance, which would produce tetanus. Whether or not the medical stuff works, it works for the story, and that Watson has this for me is the first time in the first two stories where Watson has an expertise that can come to play. Am I right? That I didn't miss anything, right? He can finally say, I have something to add.
Tangible contribution, yeah.
Yes. And he does, and that is his. Well, we'll just finish this chapter today because now the police arrive. And it's Mr. Athelney Jones, who is just, completely out of his depth, and a funny character. And this is the way Doyle wants to do these mystery stories now, where Holmes is brilliant, but the police are they're just baffled and don't know what to do with anything.
The laughable constabulary.
Yeah. Jones tells Holmes, well, they knew each other from another. Holmes had solved a case for him before. And Jones is like, oh, that was luck, right? And stern facts here, no room for theory. He keeps calling him Mr. Theorist, which is really funny. And Holmes just kind of battles it with sarcasm. He says, oh, it's hardly a case for me to theorize over. And when Jones first says, oh, that Sholto did it, and Holmes is like, oh, in which the dead man very considerably got up and locked the door on the inside. But Jones is, this is what happened, and Sholto Thaddeus must have killed his brother Bartholomew and taken the treasure, and that's facts, and that's what's happened here. And look, there's a hole in the ceiling, and look, it goes out into the roof, and Holmes like, yeah, it's because I went out there and saw that already. But then we get the great, Holmes's great departing line for Jones is like, oh, and by the way, I can tell you. The name of the person who did it is Jonathan Small. He's poorly educated, Small, active with his right leg off, wearing a wooden stump, which is worn away upon the inner side. His left boot has a coarse, square-toed sole with an iron band around the heel. He's a middle-aged man, much sunburned, has been a convict. This might help you. And he's got a good deal of skin missing from the palm of his hand, and the other man, but then he won't tell him that.
Rather curious person. But then we get to a mention, at least, of one of my favorite characters in the entire canon, Toby.
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 Holmes tells Watson to knock old Sherman up and tell him with my compliments that I want Toby at once. And Watson just thinks, okay. Oh, no, Holmes does tell him. He tells him it's a dog, right? So Watson doesn't go thinking he's going for someone named Toby. It's a dog. And a queer mongrel with a most amazing power of scent. I would rather have Toby's help than the whole detective force of London. And that's where we'll leave it. We'll meet Toby next week, everyone.
And see if that creosote does turn out to be helpful.
Yes.
Convenient.
Yeah. Well, Sherlockians, thank you for joining us for episode 3 of Sherlock Mondays. Monica, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Looking forward to next time.
You'll be back in just 2 weeks for a scandal in Bohemia and
the
Sherlock woman.
She was always the woman.
Yeah, so that'll be great.
On the inside of my husband's wedding band.
Les, thank you. I can't thank you enough for joining us on this. This is
my pleasure. I'm hoping that since you said you're going to pay people, I thought maybe you'll invite me back to the Hound of the Baskervilles. Or maybe that isn't quite what you said.
I have some great signed editions of the Annotated Frankenstein. I'd be happy to send you one.
Great.
Well, everyone, coming up next week, we'll finish the Sign of the Four with 2 thrilling pursuits. Our detectives chasing the criminals and Watson chasing Mary Morstan. Will Holmes stay off the cocaine? I will be joined by Mary Alcaro, who has been designing all my lovely cocktails and is a really great Sherlockian herself. You don't want to miss that one. Thanks to our chat, Mrs. Hudson, Brianna, for managing the live chat links. Thank you to the sponsor of Sherlock Mondays, Lisa Washington. We couldn't do these shows without the generous support of our patrons. You can support the Rosenbach through donation. Your support helps us create more programs like this and also care for our collections and the Doyle manuscript that we have and the other books we have. You could also become a member. Membership gives you early access and discounts to programs and courses. You can find out more at our website, rosenbach.org. Again, let me remind you all to subscribe to our channel and like these videos. And if you're listening to the podcast, leave us a review. Monica, Les, thank you so much. Everyone, I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library, where the game is a book. Bye-bye.